Hello, hello. Today, we are going to be talking about constructive conflict, learning from African traditions. This specific training slash video is important to me because I think a lot of what I know to be true is that we have been colonized in mind, in body, in spirit. Um, and as we continue to live, if you are living in America like I am, so I will only speak to my experience. And when I say we, for the people who are like, who are you talking about? We, many of us Black Americans and Black folks living in America, Black folks living across the diaspora who take on Western ideals, non-Black folks, etc., we have taken on white as right and the Western ways of being. And with that, there is a lot of things that need to be broken down for us to really get at the root of who we are and to see ourselves wholly. And for me, that means going backwards and looking into African ways of being, also connecting ancestrally with my African ancestors. And so that inspired me to create this video for today. I have, for myself, noticed when I am in conflict, and the first thing that I think to do is to just keep it inside or to tell only a small set of people who really can't do anything about the conflict existing, also can't help to ensure that harm is not done moving forward. But I've noticed that those ways of me acting and also that not being helpful for those who are coming after me. And so it really required for me to sit with a lot of what I was taught about being in conflict, what it looks like for you to be the one who speaks up when conflict arises, and how people then view you from that. But that is, again, what I've been taught and not necessarily what is constructive or what is helpful and what has the power and the authority to actually heal those who have been harmed and those who have done the harming. So this is a long introduction, but yes, this has led me into today's topic: constructive conflict, learning from African traditions, and moving beyond civil discourse to truth, accountability, and communal healing. The reason that I put civil discourse in here is because recently in a conflict that I was in, I noticed that the person who I spoke about then tried to make it as if there's an opportunity here for civil discourse. And if you are Black, again, in America, you have heard the word civility, civil discourse used and weaponized specifically against people who are speaking up against oppressive actions and behaviors. And it's a way to essentially tone police and silence those from telling the truth. And it's not of our ancestry. It's not of us. And so as part of Black History Month, but just in general of us needing to be on our Zooms, this training is for you. How do you move past the dog whistles of white supremacy like civility and civil discourse? They're telling you to make sure that even in your places of business that you're having civil discourse. Sherm put out something about that when the election was happening. How do you have civil discourse and civility inside of a workplace? And so I'm here to remind you that white people don't have to set the tone for who we are and how we interact with one another. So yeah, before I continue, let me just tell you a little bit about who I am in case you have never met me or do not know the person that you are listening to. My name is Denisha. I am a licensed clinical professional counselor and a licensed and board certified behavior analyst. I have been in my field since 2007. I graduated with my master's in counseling psychology from the University of Baltimore. And I decided to go back to receive my licensure a full 8 years later. So I did not become licensed until 3 years ago. However, I have been working as a licensed behavior analyst since 2015 and also working in the field, like I said, since 2007. If I had to sum up my titles, exactly who am I typically tell people that I am an activist, a clinician, and a scholar. I believe in the scholarly works as well as the utility and the usefulness of lived experience, because I know that there is a lot of things to be learned from our folklore and from telling through our oral traditions. And some of that stuff is not going to show up in our literature. But I am a scientist and I still utilize science and evidence-based practices for my work. As an activist, I spent most of my time in my adult life activating and organizing with Justice League and Gathering for Justice, which was founded by Carmen Perez and Harry Belafonte, respectively. The work centers on any youth incarceration, police brutality, and criminal justice reform. And I'm so blessed to say that my legacy passes through many civil rights leaders who came before me. And I'm grateful, grateful, grateful always for the leadership of Carmen Perez and Mr. Belafonte. As a clinician, my clinical background is in trauma, substance abuse. I work with advanced diagnosis such as borderline personality disorder, schizophrenia, and also I've worked with the chronic homelessness, unhoused population. My current focus is on trauma, depression, anxiety, as well as I work with Black individuals, activists, organizers, and change makers, and I help them work through racial trauma and race-based stress, internalized anti-Blackness. And I use various modalities, primarily acceptance and commitment therapy, also really, really heavily influenced by Black psychology. And I want to also make sure that I say that I am the owner of a wonderful organization located in Baltimore, Maryland. There we use trauma-informed and strength-based applied behavior analysis therapy. And we also provide parent support groups as well as mental health counseling. And we just celebrated 6 years this January. So that is a little bit about me. You see on this page, little D. I always give homage to that little girl who brought me to this place that I am now. You see my baby Ollie there. If you have seen me on any other platforms, you've seen Ollie. That's my boo-boo. I am a lover of holidays, Christmas. That's my solo Christmas card on the screen. Angela Davis. We're going to end off today with a quote of Angela Davis. I always make sure to evoke Angela Davis into this space because a lot of her words really helped form who I am. And I love to travel. You see me there at the bottom in Cuba. And you'll see an Adinkra symbol there for Hodie. It really talks about accountability, and I believe that we can have community accountability. And I really push forward myself into all spaces that I am part of, thinking about how that I can also be my truest self, be the truest representation of myself, while also being accountable to myself and others. All right, so that is a little bit about me. Now getting started. By the time you finish this video today, I keep saying training, but by the time you finish this video today, you're going to be able to understand the differences of Western and African conflict resolutions, learn how African methods focus on truth, accountability, and restoring relationships, reconciliation after or over punishment. And then we are going to talk a little bit about how you can apply these resolution techniques in your real world. So really important to me is not just theory on its own, but it's theory plus practice, which means praxis. Okay, how are we applying the text into our lives? It's one thing to know the text, it's another to apply it. And so with everything that I do, I always say I don't believe in inspiration without transformation. How do you want to be transformed by listening to this? If you've come here today to actually listen to my words, how are you going to transform yourself after listening to it? Okay, so let's talk a little bit about how Western society has taught us to handle conflict. So a lot of the things that we were taught focuses and centers on the self, individual. And that's one thing we know about Western society in general. Individuals we focus on self above community. And so we learn that conflict can be legal. If you have an issue, take it to the legal system, and also individualistic. And so this is about our rights, like who has the right and what can be proven by what is written. So who, and also who can better prove their case. So with our legal system, we know that it's not about actually who is innocent. When we say guilt or innocent until proven guilty, but we also know that in our legal system, it's about who can make the best case, right? And then within the Western context, resolution is handled in private. So if you work in a workspace, there's something that's happening, it goes on, you better go tell HR. HR forms a meeting and brings the people into the room, maybe individually or even separate, or maybe even together. And that is how the conflict is then resolved. It doesn't involve anyone else. Courtrooms. In the courtroom, you might come and that's your day or your time to shine and tell your side of the story. You also see things happen behind the scenes for negotiations, pleas that happen at a table. Western society also focuses again on winning and losing. So somebody has to win and someone has to lose. It's about figuring out who that person is going to be. And we've been taught that is right, that is fair. But with this, there is a problem that still exists. The conflicts don't actually get resolved. They may just delay or suppress the issue. Repeat offenders keep doing harm. So if, let's say, the outcome doesn't really match the offense, if, a person has stolen $1 million from the community and they get off with a slap on the wrist, or they only do a year or so, or they do a year of time, it might tell them that the risk is worth it, and repeat offenders might continue to do that. So they learn then how to play the system. And when the community stays out of it, people aren't really held accountable because the community is left in the dark on what is happening. And this is where the African systems take a different approach. In the case of African conflict, and one of the things I should have said at the beginning, I am using 3 key texts for today's training video, and I will link them at the end of the training so that you can go read them fully. But the information that I've gathered here comes from these 3 texts. So with African conflict resolution, and the thing that makes it constructive is that it's a communal issue. When things arise, more people are involved in the African tradition. So this means you might involve an elder, or you do involve elders, you involve family and the community members at large, and it's out in the open. So I mentioned the courtroom or taking plea deals that happen at a table. That's not happening in African conflict. There's no sneaky backdoor deals. I won't tell anybody that this happened. The truth comes out publicly for the community. And the reason for that is the goal is to fix it. And it's not rooted in punishment. It's not handing out like a penalty. You did this wrong, so now you're the person who is going to pay. It is based on actually restoring. Another thing I want to say is that transparency is part of the process. When you are dealing with conflict in an African-centered way, the goal is for all parties to come and tell the truth. And in some traditions, it's seen that if you don't tell the truth, that you might be handled ancestrally, spiritually later. But the goal is really focused on truth telling so that there's no type of manipulating the larger community on what has occurred. And again, one of the biggest parts that I want to say is when you bring the community into it, there's a cultural wisdom that happens. It's not just 1 or 2 people deciding about something that impacts the entire community. It is everyone and the entire community's traditions and wisdom being imparted so that healing can take place. So I have a proverb at the bottom of this screen, and it says, it is when nobody else is near that two people fight to the death. So that's just a reminder that other people need to be present to help reconcile and heal, and that the community has a place for healing. Okay. The biggest thing that I feel that I had to sit with when it comes to conflict is that it's normal and it's natural. And I feel like I've been sitting with this since I was a teenager. I didn't understand why people ran from conflict. I felt like it was communication and that it could help heal. But that is not what I was seeing a lot of times growing up. That people were trying to avoid it and eliminate conflict. And the truth is conflict is very uncomfortable. It is uneasy, especially if you are the person who may have made others feel a certain way. That doesn't feel good. And just taking an approach of, I didn't intend to, but actually did harm someone. And others are saying that. And so to have to sit with that information, a lot may come up for you. And it makes sense that in the Western world, we say, well, just get rid of it then. If it doesn't feel good, just get rid of it then. But in the African way, conflict is actually an opportunity for growth. It's an opportunity for all parties to grow. And the proverb that I put at the bottom of this, it says, no matter how carefully we pound yam, some lumps will still remain. So again, conflict is going to happen. No matter how carefully you try to get rid of it, right? Or how carefully you try to eliminate it, it's still going to remain. And so handle it. We can handle it. And we can learn how to work through conflict in healthy ways. Okay. So I talked about accountability happening for individuals in African sense in public, utilizing the community. So I just wanted to give a couple examples of how conflict has been seen in the community or in other African traditions. So one of the ways that conflict is handled in Yoruba or among the Yoruba people in West Africa is that disputes are brought to the elders, and they sit under a tree or in a communal space, and they resolve the issues in front of the community. And so again, the focus is on honesty. The focus is on justice and fairness. So that happens with everyone present. Community meetings also happen among Igbo people. When the conflicts happen, the village is called, and everyone is allowed to speak. And those that are in conflict answer to the community. So I think one of the things that I really want to underscore here is that conflict, and in the Western world, you have a person that might talk about something that happened to them, and they might also share the people who have harmed them. And what people tend to do is now think that the conflict only exists between those two people. But in African tradition, we understand that conflict impacts every single part of the community. And so that is why it is handled with the community, because what has transpired between the two has the ability to spill out amongst the whole. And so that is why the community is important. When it comes to some African societies, I mentioned this earlier, but truth telling is seen to be reinforced through our spiritual connection, our spiritual practices. If you do not speak the truth, you could have some spiritual consequences. Some people also have to swear under an oath when they're coming into conflict, just to say, like, I am being truthful. I will be truthful. And then if there are people who are repeatedly engaging in harm, I do want to say exclusion is possible. But even with exclusion, it's not meant to be seen in this permanent way. I used to tell people that I believe in recycling. So I cancel and then you can come back. So like you can come back. And again, that's rooted in African tradition. And it means that, yes, there is an exile that happens for repeated harm. You need to go sit with what you are doing and what you've done, and rebuild trust before you can reintegrate with people. And so that's the recycling part. You are welcome back here after you also have been able to reestablish trust. So I do like a proverb, and I didn't put it here, but it says, if we chastise a child with the right hand, then we must draw close to them with the left. And I think that is a good proverb that just kind of reminds us that there is still care and concern that needs to happen when we are talking about and discussing conflict amongst one another. So again, reconciliation and healing also goes with addressing conflict. We can do those two things. We can make sure that we are drawing or putting conflict in the sphere or public sphere while also still holding them with some care and concern. And I think that's what people try to get at when they talk about civil discourse. But again, a lot of times it's a dog whistle because they don't even want us to use our right hand, meaning they don't even want you to speak about the harms that they have been done, just extend them grace for the sake of civility. And that is not helpful nor restorative for the unit and the community as a whole. So I talked a little bit about repeat offenders. What do we do when people keep harming? When they keep doing it? We have brought them to, we've used our elders, we've mediated, we've talked and we talked. What do you do? So again, Western society, we continue to jail people over and over again. Punishment, fines. Yeah, you've gotten fines for speeding, maybe going through a toll without paying, etc. Lawsuits, right? African traditions do things a bit differently. One, there's no ignoring it, of course. So early intervention, handling it early to avoid escalation. These are the things that when you see harm happening in real time, I think it allows us to consider the African ways of being, to not be a bystander. So early intervention matters so that we can avoid escalation. Call it out when it happens. Let's talk about this. I'm not going to let it fester. Why? Because there's harm that could be done. There's something at stake for our entire community if this continues to happen. So that is one. The public truth telling. Again, the goal here is that it's out in the open. There's no manipulation that can happen when the truth is being told, right? And then social consequences. The social consequences that I discussed on the last slide. What might need to happen if change is not made? So you want to stop the bleed before it spreads, essentially. And so this other proverb that I shared here is, one dare not go to bed with the roof on fire. Okay. So if things are happening and you see them, we must not go to bed. We can speak to them and move towards reconciliation with love, care, concern, again, for all people involved, for all parties involved. So I have two applications here for you to do. So the first one I want you to do is kind of think about a conflict that you've experienced or witnessed. And this could be a personal disagreement that happened between your family members or friends. It could be something that happened in the workplace, or something that has happened on social media, something that's a larger social conflict. And I want you to think about what that conflict was about. And after you consider what that conflict was about, consider how it was handled. So did people resolve it in private? Were you trying to find out who was telling the truth? Like, who's the winner and the loser here? Who's going to come out on top? Who, is the lowest piece of the earth, etc., for engaging in said behavior? Did you mediate? If you did, how could you have handled it differently? So some people are also utilizing African ways of being. So if you did mediate, how would you have handled it differently based on what we talked about today? So I want you to think about applying what we've talked about. How would you ensure that the truth is publicly acknowledged? What wisdom or perspective do you think could help shift the conversation? And how would you focus on reconciliation? specifically. So take a couple of minutes to reflect on this and then write it down. So now that you've done that, application number 2, I want you to think about something that's happening in the here and now, right now. Visualize a conflict, again, a disagreement. It could be happening in your own life, at your job, or something happening on social media, but something that's happening right now. I asked you before to think about something in the past. Sometimes, we say hindsight is everything, hindsight is 2020. But I want you to think about something happening right now, because a lot of times in the here and the now is when we forget. We forget our practices. But I want to think about how you can apply what you're learning today to the conflict that's unfolding in your life right now. How can the truth be told is one of the things I want you to ask. Can the ones that are involved feel more accountable for their actions? And then how can the outcome, or what can the outcome be if the goal is reconciliation and healing for all parties and not just punishment for them? So again, I want you to take a moment to write that down and consider how you can apply the methods that we talked about today to the resolution. Well, this concludes today's video. And I hope that what you can take away from this quick video is that conflict is natural. And it is something that we can move towards and not away from. Okay. Public truth telling prevents people from being manipulated and prevents dishonesty. It also prevents people from continuing to engage in harm. So I really think about my ability to handle conflict in public, and that's a decision. And it's not something that's easy, especially knowing that people in our Western society who speak up typically become exiled and public enemy number one. But for me, one of the values that I have is taking care of the community. And I do that by helping to prevent harm from happening if I can. And the way that I can do that is speaking up. We've been taught to, some people have been taught to tell the truth even if your voice shakes. But when people tell the truth, we make sure they had a reason for their voice to shake. We tell them that they're lying. We tell them that we're embarrassed by them telling the truth. We tell them that this was not the right time or place. We tone police them. We do so many things. But there are a lot more good things that can happen when we're willing to be brave and tell the truth. Again, repeat offenders need consequences. And if you are a behavior analyst like me, consequences can mean anything. But I just mean here that we just need to respond. We need to respond and respond appropriately so that we can ensure that harm does not continue. And when we do that, we can ensure that justice is prevailing and we can correct and heal and not just punish people for what they have done. So, thank you for listening. How will you continue to apply these lessons to your own life and your community? I know this was a very brief introduction. Again, I just used 3 references for today, but I hope it is a primer and that you might continue to do your own research on African conflict mediation, constructive conflict resolution, and that you'll come back and tell me what you've learned and how it has impacted you, if so, in your family, within your own life, within your social settings. So I said I would end today with a quote by Angela Davis, as I always do. For any training or presentation I do, I always end with Angela Davis. And I want to remind you that you have to act as if it were possible to radically transform the world, and you have to do it all the time. Thank you so much for listening. Again, my name is Denisha. If you feel so generous and you want to provide any offerings to me, I've left my Cash App and my PayPal. It's totally not necessary, but I do thank you for your generosity if you feel compelled. Thank you, and I'll see you on the next video.